Mike Fisher with 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, home of the Dallas Cowboys and CowboysHQ.com. And that is where Fish has had breaking news on the Dez Bryant situation for the last several months now, as contract talks have continued and then halted and then continued again. Fish, look, the deadline is tomorrow afternoon. Is this deal going to get done between Dez Bryant and the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, everybody keeps trying to put a gun to my head and with an answer, and I keep trying to answer. And Armen, you know me, I'm not a percentage guy, and I'm not a game show contestant, so I don't have to pick a curtain. The people involved going into the 4th of July weekend had a level of comfort with where this was going, and I've seen nothing to change that. Dez's tweet yesterday about I'll miss games. He told me that 30 days ago, and we wrote the story, and it went around the country. And now some people have tried to treat this like this is a new threat, and some people have reported that he's took it straight to Stephen Jones. Stephen Jones told me that never happened. So this is not a new threat. It's the same threat. It's not a new problem. It's the same problem. There aren't new answers. They're the same answers, and I think the answers end up, if they can get there, 7 years, $100 million, and $38 million guaranteed, and let's get this bad boy done.
Fish, does the tweet, the making it public, just add to this and make it a little more difficult to get the deal done?
I don't think it does at all. I think it's the same as the collusion question. I don't see who gains or loses because somebody thinks the Broncos and Cowboys have colluded. I don't think that has impact on any of it. I think Dez is trying to influence Jerry. I think Dez wants Jerry to ride in on a white horse and do what Jerry's done for 26 years and just get the deal done. But Stephen right now is the point man in negotiations with the agent, Tom Condon.
Mike Fisher at Fish Sports on Twitter, everything Dallas Sports. Mike Fisher's all over it. Fish, what is the holdup? Obviously, it's money. Why won't the Cowboys give Dez Bryant the money that he wants?
Well, we don't know what money he wants. We don't know what they'll give him. We don't know how close or how far it is. Just because there weren't talks last weekend, let's say, that's neither good nor bad. It just is. It's neither moving forward or backward. It's just a fact. Guaranteed money in years. I mean, that's what this has always been about. It's what it's always going to be about. How much guaranteed money can be in that $100 million in that 7-year deal. I don't think paying Dez Bryant $14 million a year is a hard decision, but I think that's an oversimplification. How is it paid? What's guaranteed? What's up front? What about likely to be earned money? What about kind of virtual guarantees where we're going to give you part of the money next year on March 5th if you're on the roster and all that stuff. Armen, it's like buying a $100 million house. It's probably complicated, probably a complicated thing to do, and this is that.
Fish, how much is the trust factor between the Cowboys and Dez Bryant? We've had you on before, and you've talked about the Cowboys want Dez to have this advisor. Dez doesn't want that advisor. Are we still stuck at that point?
Dez tells me repeatedly, in fact, yesterday I tweeted this at Fish Sports, and then he retweeted it. He's a 26-year-old man with 3 kids, and he's either going to make $13 million this year or get a new contract and get paid even more than that. He's in charge of himself. Now, he's not in charge of where this thing goes necessarily. It takes 2, but he gets to pick his agent. He gets to pick his advisors. He gets to pick who takes his dry cleaning, and he overpays for him to do it. And those are things that were part of Dez's troubles, I think, before, and he thinks too. So he's stripped himself of some of that stuff, and now it's not like Jay-Z is negotiating the contract. Jay-Z and Rock Nation are involved in the future marketing of Dez Bryant. This is Tom Condon, who's been doing these kind of contracts, including guys on Tony Romo's level, for years and years and years. So they're in good hands. Whatever direction it goes, negotiations are in good hands, even if they don't go well enough to create a Cowboy for life contract.
Fish, of course, Dez can pick that. Of course, he's old enough and mature enough to pick his own. But is it a point where the Cowboys say, no, we're going to pick your own?
Yeah, I think you might be alluding to this idea that there was Dez babysitting rules, the Dez rules.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I've seen it.
Yeah, well, the Dez rule that was all fake. That never happened. That never happened from the Cowboys. That was one of Dez's handlers trying to put on a presentation for the public through ESPN by saying, "Look at Dez's great behavior. Here's what Dez is going to adhere to." And, this is Jerry Jones's request, and Dez is going to do it. Jerry Jones never requested that. There was never Dez rules in place. Go back and look at them sometime if you're a football fan or just a human being, and look how preposterous they were. Dez wasn't allowed to drive himself to practice. Dez wasn't allowed to leave the house after midnight without permission. Dez wasn't allowed to have a beer without asking the Cowboys. They were preposterous, and we laughed them at the time, but because they made it all the way up to ESPN, they keep getting regurgitated no matter how false they were.
So, Fish, it sounds to me like you're under the opinion that whether they make the long-term deal or it is the franchise tag, Dez isn't going to miss games?
Well, it's almost unheard of. I think Walter Jones in 2002, under the franchise tag, might have sat out the first game, but I'm not saying he won't do it because he's a person who's driven by his passion and his emotion, and he's saying he'll do it. I'm saying that then comes the mortgage due in September, and you're going to miss a $755,000 check for missing a game. And if you're going to sit out one, by gosh, we're going to really show them. Let's sit out two. Well, now you're missing $1.5 million to sit out two games. So I think it's a powerful threat, but it's really the only threat Dez has left, the only card he has left. So whether he does it or not, he's got to play that card now, and I don't blame him for it.
Mike Fisher at Fish Sports 105.3 The Fan in Dallas, home of the Dallas Cowboys. Fish, everybody keeps comparing this to 1993 with Emmitt Smith when Emmitt held out the first two games of the season. But it's a different NFL now where you can't negotiate during the season. If Dez misses this deadline tomorrow, holding out won't help contract talks. Why would he hold out? Why would that be an advantage to him to hold out in September and October?
Well, Armen, it's a very astute point that you make. This is nothing like Emmitt Smith's deal. The CBA is different now, and you could negotiate for that player throughout the entire season. Under the franchise tag, negotiations are done tomorrow at 3 o'clock Dallas time. That's it. No more negotiations until the new NFL year next March 5th or whatever. The reason that you would threaten to hold out is different from the reason you would actually hold out, actually miss games, I mean. You would threaten to hold out so Jerry gets involved. Once it gets to be 3:01 tomorrow, I don't see much purpose in holding out. I see a purpose in the threat. I don't see a purpose in the do.
Do you believe that Steven is going to stay strong and be able to keep control and keep Jerry out? He has in situations, right? Or no? Lately.
I'm the owner. You can't keep me out. And I do think if there's not something by about lunchtime tomorrow, I think Dez calls Tom Condon and says, "What the hell are we doing?" And I think Jerry calls Steven and says, "What the hell are we doing?" I think the situation would be aided, even though it would negatively affect the Cowboys' future, blah, blah, blah. I think the situation would be aided if Jerry and Dez both got on the same big white horse and rode it heroically into the meeting room.
Part of the reason the Cowboys have had recent success, Fish, is that Jerry Jones has taken a little bit of a step back from a decision-making. He still oversees it. Is that accurate?
I like to put it this way, that it's not that Jerry's stepped back. It's that Will McClay, personnel boss, Stephen Jones, the COO, and Jason Garrett, the head coach, have stepped up.
Okay.
He's got 3 lieutenants now that are a younger generation. He's gone a long time with some of the guys that Jerry likes to consult with are guys like Lou Holtz and John Madden and Larry Lacewell. I mean, they're guys who are in their 70s. And sure. It's time for younger, fresher ears. And those 3 lieutenants now have a great deal of power and have Jerry's ears.
He's Mike Fisher with Armen and Levack, 104.5 The Team. Fish breaks news at CowboysHQ.com every day.
Fish, there's reports now that Denver has made a new offer to Demaryius Thomas. If that deal gets done, could that speed up the Dez Bryant deal in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. You're looking for some domino to fall somewhere. There's 4 wide receivers now who are looking for new deals. 2 of them under franchise tags. Thomas and Dez are those 2. Coincidentally, Julio Jones and Dez are represented by Tom Condon. That's how you juggle those dominoes. And Mr. France and his organization, I think, is partnering up with Tom Condon CAA. So basically, and he represents Thomas. So really, you've got all those guys in bed together. And yeah, if one domino can move, then another domino can move. I've always thought that it would have been easier for the Cowboys and Dez because those two guys are so motivated, Jerry and Dez. But if the Broncos are really making a move towards a compromise with Thomas, that helps the Cowboys situation in creating a Cowboy for life deal.
What's the latest on the Greg Hardy situation? Is he going to appeal the 4-game suspension?
His camp hasn't announced that it will or won't yet, but I would. Even though, as far as I'm concerned, they could have, for his involvement in domestic violence, if the rule was penalize him 2,000 games, suspend him for 2,000 games, that would have been fine by me. But the rule at the time of the infraction was 2 games. And if he takes that before Judge Doty and says, listen, I got caught speeding when the speed limit was 55. Just because we changed the speed limit to 45 doesn't mean now instead of me going 10 miles an hour over, now I'm going 20 miles an hour over. It was 55 when I drove there. That will be his argument, and I think he'd win that argument. There's nothing to lose, in my view, by Greg Hardy taking this thing to court and trying to get it knocked down, not just from 10 to 4, but from 4 to 2.
Was it a victory for the Cowboys whenever he won the appeal down from 10 to 4?
Yeah, and it's a little unsavory to suggest that anybody's celebrating because this was a domestic violence case, and Greg Hardy hasn't established that he's got his head on straight. I mean, he hadn't. Time will have to tell whether this was a one-time fluke, whether counseling is going to help, and all that kind of stuff. So a celebration would be the wrong thing to say, but if you're a football coach and you're a defensive coordinator, your job is to win football games. Greg Hardy will help them win football games.
Mike Fisher, also of DallasBasketball.com, breaking Dallas Mavericks news, including that obtaining to and relating to DeAndre Jordan. Fish, how ugly was the DeAndre Jordan situation?
Unprecedented in its ugliness, and that man's immaturity and even cowardice in the way that he not only changed his mind, which he has the right to do as a human, but in the way he hid from the responsibility of telling the person with whom he broke the promise, hey, I'm going to break the promise. Some of the jokes write themselves here. Doc Rivers' daughter got involved. We locked ourselves in a house and urged him to not pick up the phone when Mark Cuban called. Blick. We're trying to pretend that it matters whether or not Doc called Jordan or Jordan called Doc first, because it doesn't matter, if on the night before your wedding your fiance sleeps with your best man. It doesn't matter if he called her or she called him. It's the act that matters. It is an act that turns the NBA upside down. There's an unwritten rule, and an unwritten rule isn't written, but it's still a rule, and that rule was violated.
How far back did DeAndre Jordan single-handedly set back the Mavericks franchise?
Well, they're scrambling now, and they're scrambling to even be decent. And in a vacuum, they'll sign Darren Williams today, and they're going to try to get another center in addition to Zaza Pachulia, and maybe Wes Matthews will be healthy, and maybe Chandler Parsons will be healthy, and maybe Dirk will continue to defy Father Time. But even though in a vacuum it doesn't look that bad, look at the West. There's 7 teams that are clearly better than Dallas, and that doesn't count Phoenix, who thinks it is. And it doesn't count. I don't know what the Lakers are going to be. So if you have a good Maverick season this year, you're finishing 8th, and around here that ain't good enough.
Mike Fisher of DallasBasketball.com, at Fish Sports on Twitter.
Fish, if they get DeAndre Jordan, are they even remotely interested in Darren Williams?
They wouldn't have been able to afford him. It wouldn't have fit. But they would have. It probably would have been Jeremy Lin, and they have DeAndre Jordan and Jeremy Lin and all those guys I just mentioned, and They have a much brighter future because they have a 26-year-old unique budding star in DeAndre Jordan. Now they're back to having a bunch of guys who are really good third players on a good team, and somebody's going to have to be the first and second best player. They don't have that.
Sure. Mike Fisher of DallasBasketball.com, 105.3 The Fan in Dallas. Fish, when it comes to DeAndre Jordan and the Chris Broussard reports, how accurate were the reports of Mark Cuban driving around Houston, and your take and your insight on that back and forth between those two?
And I hate to be, I hate to tear a guy apart because, and you guys know this, we're all scrambling for information. We're all trying to do our best. We all got mortgages to pay, but that was a debacle. And Chris's mistake, first of all, was allowing himself to think something was real when it defied logic. It's not logical that Mark Cuban wouldn't know where DeAndre Jordan's house is. That doesn't make any sense, considering the fact that DeAndre Jordan at the time was essentially a Mavs employee, and that Chandler Parsons 10 days earlier had just spent 4 days at DeAndre Jordan's house. And I said this on Twitter, I can find Armen Williams' house in 13 seconds. I can find your marital status. I can find how many times you've been arrested. I can find your address. I can find if you pay in 13 seconds. So to think that some idiot like me can do it and that Mark Cuban and Chandler Parsons can't, that defies logic. And then furthermore, and this is Chris's biggest mistake, Mark Cuban is the most accessible billionaire in the history of the world. All you got to do is text him, and he answers. And so for Chris Broussard to make that accusation without first asking Mark Cuban, hey, I'm told by the Clippers that you're driving aimlessly around Houston looking for an address, Cuban could have saved him all sorts of problems. I don't know, maybe even his job, certainly his reputation, by telling him, no, Chris, I'm not. I'm at the Galleria right now trying to call DeAndre. I know exactly where he lives. You'd be a fool to write that. Instead, Cuban had the displeasure of having to tell Chris that after the report was issued.
Mike Fisher at Fish Sports on Twitter, DallasBasketball.com, CowboysHQ.com, Mavericks, Dallas Cowboys. He's all over it on his websites. Fish, great talking to you, man. Love you, baby. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, boys.